Okay.
Do you see the recording going on?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, now I do. So let's start. Welcome everybody to the Open Data Institute's lunchtime lectures. I'm Elea and I'm a senior consultant. It is with great pleasure that I'm introducing you today to Jack and Graham from DNVGL. Both of them are no strangers to the ODI. In fact, we have been working very closely together since July, when they were one of the 7 projects which received funding from the stimulus fund. They will talk today about the challenge they set out to address with this funding, namely how data can help us to get to a net zero economy. No simple challenge, and we will hear from them how they get on with the journey since the last 6 months they have joined. Before I hand over, I'm gonna have some housekeeping announcements to do. This talk is being recorded. You can ask questions at the end, just pop them into the chat channel and I will ask them on your behalf. Please make sure to turn off your video and you mute yourself during the talk. Thank you. Over to you, Jack and Graham.
Great. Thank you very much for the warm welcome, Elia. We'll both start with some introductions of our own. So nice to see so many of you on the call. My name is Graham. I'm DNVGL's Digital Innovation Lead, and I'm based down in London. And I'm joined on for the presentation today by my colleague Jack. Jack, would you like to do an intro?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So as Graham says, I'm Jack. I'm based in Aberdeen. I'm a consultant engineer. I've spent most of my career in risk and compliance management, and working closely with Graham on the development and innovation piece, looking at different parts of our services.
Great, thanks very much, Jack. So I guess a brief introduction to our organisation and DNVGL. So who are we? Well, we're an independent provider of risk management and quality assurance services, and very much driven by our corporate purpose, which is to safeguard life, property, and the environment. And our vision, if you like, is to be a trusted voice to tackle some of the critical transformations that our world is undertaking. We've got a sample selection of some of the kind of key focus areas for our group at the moment. We have a number of different service offerings across asset life cycles in renewables and maritime, digital solutions, oil and gas, and of course, one of the focus points for today's presentation, the energy transition. A whole mix of people, skills and experience in data analytics, consulting, engineering and software, but also very much an organization that likes to research, produce and publish industry articles on the energy transition itself, for technology, where we've covered things like artificial intelligence and the assurance of technology and data, right down to the use of industrial IoT for certain industries. So myself and Jack work in a small team based around the UK, where we have a small digital and data analytics cohort. And fairly recently, our organisation launched an open industry data platform that we call Veracity, of truthfulness, which you can find at veracity.com. Okay, so let's set the scene for today's presentation. I'll pass to Jack.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. So, yeah, what is carbon capture, utilisation and storage? So simplify it, then capturing CO2 in the first instance. So you're really looking at the energy intensive industries such as steel, fertilization, chemical plants, etc. So there's technology which captures the CO2 from the emissions and stops them getting into the atmosphere. And then we want to place them in a pipe and transfer them either by pipe, or you can do it by ship as well, but traditionally we're doing it by pipe. And we're focusing on industrial clusters, which you hear quite a bit in the news. trying to cluster these heavy plants into one geographic area. They're already there. What we're trying to do is capture the CO2, and then your plant that you have to build and invest in to transfer it is more efficient. So we capture it. We can also reuse or recycle the CO2 and put it into new manufactured products such as plastics or biofuel, or even into your fizzy drinks. That gives it some economic value, but that on its own is not really enough to really deal with the challenge, the climate challenge. You can also transfer it, what's the word I'm looking for, convert it into hydrogen, which is a big part of the new government green strategy. Quite an important element of it, because that becomes its own domestic energy source, which can be a key part of the energy balance as society moves forward. But reutilization on its own, as I said, only deals with a small part of the problem. So then you have to dispose of the rest, and disposing of the rest means put it into a storage place, which is underground reservoirs, which, to be fair, most of, or very often, come from reusing the reservoirs which were used in the first place to extract the dirty fuel that we use today, if you like. And really, the key thing about carbon capture and storage is that without it, most published transition outlooks predict that we cannot achieve any of the climate goals, the Paris Accord, or any of the individual government goals. We can't achieve it without doing carbon capture and climate. It's just not fast enough to transition without it. Okay, next slide.
Great, thanks very much, Jack. So how do we start to link the premise of carbon capture and that great outline that Jack just gave to our work with the ODI on the stimulus fund, and also how does data play a part? Well, just a few months ago, as Elia outlined, we kicked off effectively our challenge, really trying to respond to the question of how can data promote trust in our progress towards this net zero economy, very much using carbon capture, utilization, and storage as our use case. So we've ignited a piece of research, really exploring the role a trusted third-party data institution could play in facilitating CCUS projects. So throughout the course of the next 10-15 minutes, we'll present the findings of our research project to date, but also very much here to share our experience of working with the ODI on this initiative. For Jack and I, it was our kind of first steps on a project of this kind. So we'll outline our own journey, some of our key findings, and some of our key learnings to date. Okay, so a little bit more background, and then I'll start to dive into to our work and how we set ourselves up, as it were, to conduct this activity. Jack touched on industrial clusters a couple of slides ago, so I just wanted to expand on that narrative a little bit further. You know, what are industrial clusters, and how are they important to the United Kingdom? You can see from looking at the graphic on the right-hand side, which kind of helps me tell the story. Industrial clusters are typically areas with a number of industrial sites. So as Jack has outlined, you know, that could be, you know, heavy industry that's producing chemicals, glass, iron, steel, or even refining oil. But what's quite key here is that clusters are, hopefully you can still see the sharing. Clusters are kind of key hubs of you know, the kind of key sources of jobs and opportunity in these areas, and they're very much part of the kind of like the local economy, and very much seen as kind of being key kind of focus areas and key to the overall transition of our journey towards net zero. You know, if we can somehow start to work on decarbonizing those heavy emitters, that heavy industry, and start very much to kind of very much reduce the number of emissions that are produced from that industry as a result, then we're likely to make a significant impact with respect to the total number of CO2 emissions that the United Kingdom produces as we start to head through the next 15, 20, 25 years, heading towards 2050. So with that kind of background and that kind of premise and that kind of scenario very much at the back of our minds. Jack and I set off on a journey to really start to interview some of the kind of key stakeholders involved in industrial clusters, or involved perhaps in the oil and gas industry, or organizations who might well be playing a part in the transportation and storage of either CO2 or, of course, its derivative, hydrogen. So we talked and discussed and interviewed a whole raft of different individuals and discussed challenges around, the availability of data, very much focusing and bringing this back to data. What are the opportunities that greater awareness and visibility of data could bring to industry, to the various actors in the supply chain? What benefits could wider data sharing kind of yield within this developing carbon capture industry, but of course very much mindful of the fact that this links back ultimately to the kind of the big emitters sitting in those industrial clusters. And our overarching ambition, as I mentioned earlier, is to deliver our findings in the form of like a synthesized report or white paper to the ODI, but of course effectively to the general public at large, and specifically to key industry players, outlining the role that data institutions and trusted third parties can play in this emerging industry. Now my screen has just gone blank, so I'm going to try to move to the next slide. Hopefully it will work. There we go. Jack, over to you.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so our key findings looking at the data side of things. And what you have to keep in mind here is that there is no operational UK facility for carbon capture and storage as yet. And further, the government hasn't published what their business model looks like yet. There's some framework, but the final position on how carbon dioxide and the capturing of it and what sort of reward mechanisms are going to be in place, that's not in place. So when you start to talk about what the data that goes with that, then obviously you're fishing in a fairly empty pond. But there is some work which is commenced in this area, but it's really going to be in silos. And for our part, we think that you need to go beyond those silos, because otherwise they're only really going to be dealing with one single part of the whole supply chain. And so we've mapped out, and Graham will go on to this in a moment, but the data ecosystem, which follows that flow of the gas. So what does the data look like at each part of those? And it needs to be integrated, it needs to be connected, because if the government are going to publish a commercial or business model, then surely there needs to be a clear data model that goes with it, because otherwise the transparency of the metrics and who gets what out of the government funds, well, that's going to be difficult to achieve. And really the last part on this slide that I wanted to draw attention to, and was really a pretty common theme that came out of the ODI summit last week, was that a trusted third party is going to be required to assure and provide insights from the data at each part of that supply chain. And that's pretty key for the business going forward. Next slide, please.
There we go.
So in terms of what that third party really looks like, and there's a whole bunch of work around the data control, but actually Graham's going to come into that in a moment. I wanted to talk about the technical context, and this is where we think that DNVGL as an organisation can bring value, and that's the technical context, the understanding of what the risks are, and the overall goals of the business. Because without that understanding, then the data is difficult to manage. You have to understand what the critical criteria and parameters at each stage of the flow of the gas, and who needs to see what and where and when, and really taking all of that and putting it together to give that commercial and risk transparency, both of those together. Whilst the commercial part is important for the government model, CO2 introduces new risks. It's going to be put into existing pipelines in many cases, but those pipelines have been designed and used for many years for a different type of gas. So you're putting something different in there. Is it suitable for that? And what are the risks which need to be monitored during the operation, which may impact? So the monitoring of impurities, for example, is one of the things which will have to be controlled. You have to kind of imagine that any kind of uncontrolled incident that could happen. Let's be fair, all of these high risk industries have got potential, and it's managing that potential which is important. If anything like that happens, the impact on public perception of the safety of that operation will have a huge potential to derail any future projects or even the ones that are ongoing. So a huge risk there. And whilst you can talk about the pipeline, the reservoir itself, where you put the gas at the end, it also has got its own integrity issues, which we need to kind of control and monitor. So commercial risk, technical matters, which all need to be monitored and mapped. And then I'll give over to Graham to talk about the data control part of it.
Great, thank you, Jack. Move to the next slide. Okay, so there was one key theme that came out or continues to come out of the research that Jack and I are undertaking in the space, and that's trust. So there's an underlying kind of headline here, which is trust. So trust in data, both the content of the data and the provenance of the data. Trust in any underlying algorithms or data models that might be used throughout the entire value chain. And I think from our perspective, what's seen as very important is how organizations either assure or verify those underlying data models, or very much validate, as I say, the provenance of that data. So we know that business, big business in particular, is increasingly focused on getting value from data, trying to get into this mindset where data is really treated as a key and a core asset, and not just something that's out on the periphery. You know, we think that there's now greater realization that to achieve maximum value, that data now needs to be in a position where it's fit for purpose, it's fit for use, it's accessible within organizations, let alone on a slightly kind of wider and broader scale, and it's quality assured. You know, we see greater introduction and certainly lots of potential in the CCS space for the introduction of machine learning algorithms and automation, either semi-automation or fully automated systems and solutions. That will lead to a greater uptake of AI-based solutions and lots of data mining activities that we expect to see happening in this space. Data mining, perhaps where we're kind of mining knowledge from previous activities and projects. And Jack used the example of for example, the well data and the kind of some of the reuse of physical infrastructure. And there's an awful lot of knowledge and kind of project specific information there that's in some cases locked away, or perhaps is where the potential is perhaps untapped. And it's all about having trustworthiness, having trust in that data, having trust in those algorithms, the machines, the tools, and the methodologies that are used to extract that data in order to help big business make sensible, suitable, and trustworthy decisions. But it's also a prerequisite for safe and sustainable operations of those critical systems, as Jack has outlined, and whilst there are opportunities for companies building these database solutions, and there are plenty of those, we are very conscious that there are many challenges in this space. So for us, what will continue to be a theme as we head through the rest of the research will be looking at how we can help organizations make the right decisions with respect to the building, the selecting, and the deployment of algorithms and techniques associated with mining data, managing data, and also the evaluation criteria for how new solutions and new AI-based models are brought into those organizations. So what we've tried to do is to take some of those findings and try now to drop those findings onto a data ecosystem map. And this was very much one of the activities that came out of one of the many workshops that we've held with the ODI. So this is great, and we've done a whole load of research talking to industry. So how does that translate itself in terms of data? Well, I guess first and foremost for us as a team, it's been great to really put this in front of key stakeholders and present a connected data ecosystem, because it's allowed organizations to develop and really discuss things like, kind of clarity on certain and specific matters at play. So for example, using data to both quantify and qualify emissions that are captured and moved along by specific organizations, how CO2 CO2 is transported through networks, how CO2 is processed and transmitted to CO2 storage sites, and ultimately how CO2 is captured within those offshore storage sites. You know, we see additional benefits. If you look at the ecosystem map there on the kind of the top and the right-hand side, you know, how the interpretation or kind of raw storage site or reservoir data potentially be released much further afield to support this overall transition. You know, what's the, you know, what need is there for potentially anonymized benchmarking via a trusted third party to kind of really broker and bring lots of these disparate players and parties together. And if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, and something we are yet to explore in detail, but very much will be exploring as we head into 2021, is, you know, where does hydrogen fit into this whole value chain from a data perspective? So we're going to very much start to move into areas where we explore how, you know, what data and data assets are created as we start to produce and then potentially store and transport hydrogen that's produced as a result of these kind of CCS activities and projects. But, you know, with respect to data, we are mindful that there's potentially some sensitivity around the type of data likely to emerge from CCS projects as they develop. As an organization, as we bring our research and our activity to a conclusion, we expect to recommend a mix of different operating models. It could be completely open data, it could be anonymized data, could be curated, and in some cases it could be privatized or membership based. And it's still pretty early days to really expand on those themes too much, but they are kind of thoughts, and I guess in some cases perhaps emotive thoughts that have emerged from industry as we've conducted our research. And we see many kind of use cases for data from lots of different players starting to come to the fore, and that could, you know, bring plenty of exciting opportunity and discussion for business models as to how data could be shared, accessed, paid for, and made available heading forward. As I say, in the ecosystem map, you know, we haven't really mapped out the core elements and the links between carbon dioxide and hydrogen in any great detail, but we do hope to do that soon. But I think really the key headline for us, and certainly the kind of the realization that came into our minds as we drew this map and worked with both the ODI and industry to do this, is that, you know, breaking data silos that currently exist between organizations in the space is needed to foster collaboration. You know, it's needed to foster collaboration on CCS projects, and it's reasonable to expect that, you know, as those discussions start to mature and as they start to move forward, that kind of digital leaders and data managers in those organizations will then be, you know, expected to drive further conversation around how data could be shared at both a logical level, how data can be used to drive discussion around those open connected technologies that are very much starting to emerge as CCS projects get off the ground, and also a very technical sense how data can be shared logically, APIs and of course data standards start to come into the fore there. I'll move to the next slide, Jack.
Yes, so it would appear that our study is quite timely with the government's announcement this week. Mr. Johnson, of course, likes to say that we're world leading. We would kind of perhaps put a caveat on that, and that we're slightly behind the curve. You know, there are other countries, including Norway, Netherlands, and others, who already have made significantly more progress in getting a carbon capture storage plant to at least closer to operation than we are currently at. So we have a network internally and we have a network externally that we can now draw upon, and we're already talking to colleagues in other parts of the world to take learnings from there and see is the data already exists, which will help us to map things out in a better way. But as we said, there's still limited data available from an operational perspective. There's lots of studies and kind of feasibility reviews being done on particular sites and particular plant on what's possible for capex investment. But from in terms of plant actually running and what you want to monitor when you're doing that, that's still fairly early, even in these other countries. There are plants out there, but they're mainly onshore. So Canada, for example, got running plants. So yeah, that's I think yeah, I'll let Graham discuss Microsoft and etc. If you
yeah, I mean, yeah, of course. Thanks, Jack. I mean, there was a big announcement from Microsoft. I think it was a couple of weeks ago that they very much tend to create a new business ecosystem based around carbon management. You know, they've kind of they've effectively kind of offered up technology services or other services to initially starting and building upon the Northern Lights project and activity that's taking place offshore Norway. So they're going to be looking at how software platforms based, I think, on open source principles are going to help foster the technology and the business innovation really needed to make this a reality at an unprecedented scale. But again, Jack and I were really fortunate to have a conversation with them about a week or so ago. And again, recurring theme bubbled to the surface here. You know, trust is key, and trust in the provenance of data as these activities start to get off the ground is deemed to be vitally important as we move forward. I'll maybe now take us all back to our links and our work with the ODI as we move to the end of the presentation. What's been great for us is really taking this activity, this project, and really trying to link it back to previous work and research that the ODI have undertaken and explored on the energy sector in general, and of course from our side very much around how do you build a sustainable business that's potentially trying to fill a data institution space in an industry that doesn't quite exist yet. So we've had great conversation, and we've learned an awful lot from working with the ODI on tools and processes and also techniques that we can use and we can very much embrace and deploy to really help us have meaningful conversations at lots of different levels, both at the heavily technical level or engineering technical level, but also very much at the data level too. So really try to sow the seed around the benefits of greater availability, sharing and awareness of data in an emerging industry. So using tools like the Data System Ecomap, as I say, has been great for us and been a real enabler for that. But also we're really kind of thankful and appreciative of the ODI for helping us make some key connections with other data institutions and also the government, which is something that's coming up very soon for Jack and I. And ultimately really helping instill very much a premise of open and transparent collaboration. I know it's something that we've greatly enjoyed being part of, and being able to kind of openly share our research in the form of blog posts, which you'll find on our website, right down to those kind of final reports and or other presentations that we produce as we head towards the back end of the project. So we've greatly appreciated and enjoyed the support, and of course working with the ODI to do that. So I guess moving to the last slide, which is really where do we head next? What are the next steps for us? What's the next step for industry, and where's this all going? Maybe Jack, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, sure. So if you think back to the data eco map, what we want to do next is to overlay those parameters and criteria that we spoke about onto each part of the map and the supply chain to say, okay, these are the important data parameters that we need to capture at each stage. So overlay that on top of the map, and then on top of that again is to take our own expertise that we have in different parts of the organization and say, okay, this is where we can provide value. These are the services or the experience that we've got, and kind of map that onto the eco map as well. And then you have something that, as a CCUS value chain, where we've got use cases and insights that we can share with industry and the position for us, of course, which at the end of the day is why we're doing research. Graham already mentioned that the government departments that we need to reach out to, we're somewhat cautious of that. We don't kind of careful not to step on toes. There are data sources out there already that partly the government owns, and we need to find out ways to work with them and learn more about their intentions. So as we mentioned, we're very thankful to ODI for some of the inputs there. So yeah, Graham.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. I've already mentioned Microsoft. It is important for us to try to get relationships and good conversation going with them, and we've been really fortunate, as I say, to already have one of those, and it's important we keep some momentum behind that. But also, we're also very mindful that there are lots of other initiatives out there that become kind of very, very relevant as we move through the remainder of our activities here. You know, particularly as we start to move into the hydrogen and the onshore gas space, and as our discussions start to accelerate around how potentially hydrogen can be blended and introduced into our gas transmission systems, for example, then from a data perspective, it's really important to be aligned and connected with things like the Modernizing Energy Data Initiative that's in flight and very much progressing. And ultimately, in the future, you know, we will have operational facilities, and it's fairly reasonable to expect that by the time they're operational, then the world of digital twins will have matured even further. So very much being mindful and trying to be connected to and contribute potentially to the activities that the CDBB, the Centre for Digital Built Britain, are starting to move ahead is really, really important for us. But yeah, I guess as a closing remark, our immediate next steps, CCS and conversations notwithstanding, are also trying to move forward and explore those assurance activities. So there's assurance and verification activities rooted in, you know, kind of validating and providing confidence around data and algorithms that are likely to be used in this and related industries is something we need to move ahead with now. We've recently published a short article on our website, which you can see here, which outlines how such, you know, kind of techniques can be used to provide trust and build confidence with stakeholders within across industry or within your own organization. And we have a recommended practice also for how an organization might approach that. And I guess finally, Jack and I want to build a sustainable business. So there's a lot to do and a long way to go. I think we're quite pleased with where we've gotten to today, but equally, you know, we're very mindful of the fact there's an awful long way to go. So ultimately, what we do does need to be sustainable, and yeah, and we're both really excited as to where this might take us in the future, and how important it is to the UK and beyond as we head through that. Okay, Elia, that was our last slide.
Thank you so much, Graham and Jack. We are now open for questions. You can put them into the chat channel and I'm gonna pick them up from there. But I'm gonna go ahead with the first question to give everybody with time to think about what they want to ask. And my question is going to be about future. There is so much future at stake in your project, and also future of, you know, kind of a lot of ideas and concepts in place, which are all yet to be realized. So I wanted to kind of bring you back a bit to what you have presented at the summit. So what is your idea for an optimal future in regards to your project, and maybe what is your idea of an optimum failure?
Oh goodness. Okay. Jack, do you want me to start?
Sorry, Graham, I didn't quite catch that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I guess some initial thoughts, Elliot. Yeah. I mean, we've talked a lot about government and how those conversations are key, but also very much the policy making is key. And I think it was Jack who presented, you know, without government policy for CCS data initiatives in particular is really important, but also for all those connected industries as well. You know, data has the potential to provide certainty to government that business can demonstrate that they are meeting overall net zero targets, but it will also provide transparency to allow any kind of final government business model to function efficiency. So for us, you know, a good future is very much around good, strong government policy where there is, you know, kind of really a strong kind of rooted data reference and an inference. And I guess on the flip side of that, a bad one is one without that. But I think specifically one without transparency. You know, one without transparency both through data, one without government support, and really one that doesn't enable open innovation or collaboration. you know, and we see that there's an appetite to do that, but in many cases there may well need to be a mandate for certain players in this chain to work in an open and innovative fashion, and that's why the government policy is so key. So yeah, so a positive one, that will happen, but the negative side of that is that it doesn't, and therefore actually there isn't the openness and the transparency that Jack and I, and of course many others, very much hope for. Jack, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Not really. I mean, I suppose just to add something, to have something to say. Regulation drives a lot of things, and without it, typically something needs to happen. Something good or bad needs to happen in order to convince people that there's a business benefit to sharing, or to taking a particular direction. And rather have the foresight in the first place to say, okay, these are the risks and this is what we're going to do about it, and we'll put at least policy in place, but even better, some regulation in place.
Thank you. So we have questions coming in, and the first one is from Adrian, and he asks, who are the key players in government you see yourself working with? Base, ...
Yes.
They're going to be issuing policy, but OGA as well. They own the data source at the moment in terms of reservoirs, so we'll need to cooperate with them as well, but primarily BEIS.
And then we have another question from Kevin. He says, thanks for the really interesting talk. Do you see future work in other aspects of the net zero economy outside of CCS? For instance, solar panels and EVs, etc.
Oh, okay. That's a good question. I mean, yes. I mean, there are certainly many of the parts of our organisation who are exploring solar and PV and really starting to oh, well, actually, electric vehicles is a great example of how some of our work on kind of validating and proving that algorithms are fit for purpose is really key. You know, so I know that we have colleagues who are very much trying to connect with the key players in the electric vehicle world, because of course ultimately the electric vehicles, or any electric vehicle that's produced, will be heavily reliant on data and algorithms, and certainly that very much has a safety inference. So we've got colleagues who are exploring that, and we do hope at some point in the future our system approach to CCS and hydrogen will really then start to take a slightly perhaps broader view and start to look at the whole energy supply chain. For those who've not seen it, we've actually got some narrative or some publications that are out there that really look at the world's energy system as we head through the period to 2050. So we've got an energy transition outlook that's openly available on our website. That you know, that's really intended for use by analysts and decision makers within industry, but it really looks and forecasts the significant risks and or opportunities for different kind of energy mixes, and I know there's a kind of key industries as we head through the coming period. So if you're interested in the other work that our organization has done on these different kind of energy systems, then yeah, I recommend you go and have a look at our ETO, because that kind of articulates and produces quite a lot of data, model data, forecast data, to demonstrate where we feel the world might head, and perhaps some of the considerations that need to be made on that front. Jack, is there anything you want to add?
Yes, just that there are other colleagues in our business that verify the plant related to wind power or solar power or these alternative clean energies. We do an awful lot of work with the plant, but as Graham was mentioning there, so it's starting to hook together the data from each one of these individual parts of the energy mix. That, you know, that changes the picture a little bit. Understanding at any time where your energy supply is coming from, I think that will help to convince individuals that there's something they can do about it.
Thank you. So it's a thank you from Adrian also, who asked the before last question. And the next one is from Andri, who asked, hello everybody, where can we read about open standards you talked about?
Okay, yeah, sure. So with, I guess maybe there are 3 or 4 connotations there. So maybe I'll start with our own work. So our ecosystem map and effectively a slightly more detailed summary of our findings to date and our approach to next steps. That's sitting on our website, and yeah, you'll find it just by heading to dnvgl.com and clicking on the blogs tab, and you'll see the various articles and kind of information that Jack and I have released, specifically then around those other initiatives that we're connected to. So I think I talked about media, and I don't have the URL in my head, but I know that the guys at Energy Systems Catapult, for example, are busy collating and building a wiki or a Confluent site that's going to start housing things like a glossary of terms and start to reference, who's creating, what terminology is used in this industry, and who are the players there, and what are those key reference points. So that's I guess through Energy Systems you can find the kind of the meter glossary of terms. With respect to open data standards that might underpin CCS initiatives, well, I guess it's too early, but something Jack and I want to try to do as we head into next year is to potentially look at connecting all of those different available standards that exist today, and connect those various parties and those stakeholders together, and then potentially model something using some of those existing open data standards, but potentially by creating or influencing some, and maybe use some examples or kind of example or use case based data to show how a CCS value chain could be mapped in data, using existing data sources based on the existing data standards. So I don't really have the answer to what standards have we created, because we haven't created any. But and I think what we want to do is to make sure we build on work that others have done, and if there are gaps, then review the value that perhaps that we can bring and potentially fill in that space.
Just to add a little bit to that, it depends what you're asking about, but if it's to do with data standards, then there's the RPs that Graham referred to earlier on in terms of how to assure the digital twin. They're available on our website, and if you search for digital twin on dnvgl.com, then you'll find the standards which are available for the twin itself, or the data quality, or the algorithm. We do have technical standards related to plant on carbon dioxide and capture of it. CO2 Risk Man is one of the tools that again is available on our site in terms of how to manage the risk of CO2. So on top of what Graham said, these are other sources.
I just maybe add one thing, Elia. If hopefully the slide was on there long enough, but if there's anybody in the audience who wants to perhaps reach out, make contact, grab a virtual coffee, or maybe just wants to get hold of these links and perhaps is struggling to find some of the information sources that we've referred to, then of course please reach out to Jack and I. We'd be more than happy to either have a chat with you, or really just to forward some of those links that we've referred to. Be more than happy to do that.
That's an excellent point. And if you forget the names, just email to us, and we're going to make our best to link it back. We have a Rebecca saying thank you, super interesting.
Thank you.
And I guess I'm gonna have one last question, if I may. I'm interested about this trust. You speak a lot about trust in a lot of different facets, and you speak also about becoming a trusted third party. How do you see this role playing out of being a trusted third party?
Jack, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah. Okay. So DNVGL, we're a big organisation. We've been around for a long time, and actually that is our role in industry, and that's regardless which sector that we play in. We are the guys who provide trust. Now, historically, that's been based on plant and sometimes procedures, quality assurance. Now we want to do the same thing in the data space, and this has been our strategy for more than 5 to 10 years now, of shifting into this digital domain and enabling to take our position and reapply it to the same logic, but on digital assets. To add to that.
Yeah, I think so. I think so, Jack. Yeah, I mean, I know we mentioned it several times in the presentation, Elliot, but that's really because that's the underlying premise and the kind of the message that we're getting from talking to a lot of the stakeholders in this space, but actually also in others, and other activities that Jack and I are working on at the moment. You know, we're seeing a greater emphasis, I think, with respect to the the thoughts and the kind of the considerations that organizations, and certainly bigger organizations, if I can use the term now, want to start placing on, they're going to be making decisions, key business decisions rooted and based upon data. And in many cases, that data is going to be created from an electronic source, be it a sensor out in the field, but actually perhaps more relevant to that, an algorithm. So there are going to be machines they're going to be sucking in an awful lot of data from an awful lot of sources and in producing something, some kind of output. And that might be output that's then used to ultimately make a key strategic business decision or a financial decision, or it could very much feed into something like a digital twin, or would be very much an operational decision that would need to be made. So at the core, something that is going to very much be used as a basis for an organization to make an operational decision or a financial decision, or dare I say have a safety related consequence. I mean, that's something that's getting greater and greater focus and has more and more importance placed on it. Certainly, based on the feedback that we've received from various organisations in this activity. So, we want to help people with that. We want to help, and Jack and I have both been there actually. We've been in those positions where our own line have asked us to validate, decision making, technology selection, data choices, and sometimes it's hard, to back up and justify some of that reasoning. So, yeah, I guess I would conclude by saying we want to help those organizations do that, perhaps do that more effectively in some cases, both using our experience, but also using some of these frameworks and recommended practices that we showed on the last slide, to really help organizations get confidence, build confidence, and help them make decisions that are rooted and based upon data and or algorithms. So I see it being something that will only grow, and something where more and more importance will be placed on that in the future.
Just one other thing then. So for a while, people will accept that what's in the black box is magic and it just works and it's okay. That the results it gives you can trust them, and that's fine. But the bigger the decisions that are made, the more people will ask, what's in the box? How do I know that what's in the box is okay? And I guess there's been a few public cases this year where what was in the box wasn't quite good enough. And that will start to build the idea that, okay, I need to find the trust from somewhere. How am I going to get that?
Yeah, very, very good point about the black box. And we have a next question from Chelsea, who asks, are there any best practices or lessons learned from other sectors that could be adopted for CCUS? Data standards, initiatives, etc.?
Yeah, there's lots. Well, I don't know about data, but there's lots of experience about trying to start up these businesses and how the collaboration, when it doesn't happen, actually doesn't. Wind industry, for example, fairly new sector, and really haven't learned the lessons from a collaborative point of view. They have in some areas and not in other areas. But I think there's more to learn. That collaboration, both from a technical standards perspective, but especially from a data standards perspective, would definitely help to accelerate CCUS. I don't know if it quite answered the question. It's certainly not the best practice part, but the lessons learned part, yes, there are mistakes out there that need to be learned from.
On the data standards part, I mean, I can only re-emphasize the point that, as certainly for us, as we head through and connect further and more to different players in the space, we will be advocating the use or reuse of standards if they exist and as we discover them. So that's not a specific answer either, but really just to emphasize the point that it was not our intention to recommend the reinventing of a wheel, certainly not from a data standards perspective. So that if there are existing standards and they're starting to prove to be effective, or there's actually just a great community of really, of really good, strong ethical organizations involved in that, then I mean, of course, why would we recreate a process to start from scratch? So we would very much be advocating reuse and certainly reuse of standards that are starting to be used and developed in industry today.
From a commercial perspective, they've got to try and learn these lessons. CCUS will be under huge pressure because there's no pot of gold at the end of this. It's a waste disposal business. And you have to do it efficiently. So you have to be able to cut and paste from what other people are already doing and reproduce that quickly to make it commercially viable.
Are there any last questions before we wrap up? Any last takers? Well, for me, it's been great having you here. It's like great to hear yet another facet from your project, which we have been working on together. And I see we have a little spoiler alert popping up.
I've just seen it. It's a great question. Great point.
Shall I read it out?
Yeah, of course.
Maybe a bit of a spoiler alert. Do you have the data already to estimate how much woodland is needed to outcompete one of CCUS facilities? Smiley face.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. I think we have other people in the business who could give an estimate of that, but it's not me, I'm afraid. Sorry.
Not me.
If Adrian, I see. So if Adrian's really interested, please contact us and we'll pass you on to the right person.
Wonderful. In that case, thank you so much for sharing your work with us, and to everybody, and have a great weekend.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Really good questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.